Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session on legal policy and regulatory frameworks for renewable electrification in Tanzania, opportunities and challenges. We have a packed panel today, and this is right before lunch, so we'll try to make this as exciting and engaging as possible. I think over the past 2 days that we've been here, one of the key themes that has emerged, whether it's on investments or productive uses or capacity, training, policy and the regulatory environment is influences each one of those topics. So it plays a key role. And when it comes to energy access, whether it's electricity or whether it's clean cooking, we can all agree that making sure that everybody gets access, every household, every business, every clinic, every school will require strong public policy support, will require strong public financing support, and cooperation with the private sector to make sure that the summation of efforts adds up to universal access in a timely manner. So here in Tanzania, as we know, we heard in the first session, a lot of steps have been taken to establish the right policy framework. At IRENA, when we first started analyzing mini grid policies, Tanzania was, I think, the front runner or is the front runner among the first countries, if not the first, to establish a dedicated framework for mini grids, I think starting back in 2008 with a number of updates. Um, and policies, very often we think of policies from the perspective of only deployment. How do we put more solar home systems on the ground? How do we put more mini grids on the ground? But policies, of course, have a much larger role to play. They affect, of course, the financing, the investment flows. It affects how the technology innovation happens. It affects skills, capacity building. It affects how much the local industry develops. How do we establish those local supply chains? And also how inclusive the programs are in terms of gender, engaging the youth, and all of that. So policy goes well beyond just a discussion about how to deploy technologies, but address a lot of other socioeconomic aspects as well. So today we have almost all the key stakeholders from Tanzania's policy landscape. And I'm really hoping that in this panel we can reflect on the journey so far in the development of renewables in Tanzania from a policy perspective, and also share some insights on what needs to be done and how it can be made better to accelerate progress towards energy access. So today we'll begin with two scene-setting presentations and then jump into the panel discussion. The first scene-setting presentation will be from engineer Victor Labaa, who's the senior engineer electricity division from Ivura. And engineer Labaa, the floor is yours for your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Thank you very much for such an introduction. Yeah, so my name is Engineer Victor Labaa. I'm a senior engineer from the Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority. And I work specifically on regulation of small power projects, which includes mini grids. So I'll be taking you through my presentation, which is on regulatory framework for renewable electricity in Tanzania. So my presentation basically covers introduction, then I'll take you through the highlights of the Small Power Project Framework, which is the version of 2020. Then I'll go through the highlights on the some key issues on regulation of mini grids in Tanzania, and then I'll conclude my presentation. Um, yeah, so we say that regulatory environment is very crucial for any country for investors to go and invest. Why? Because having a good regulatory environment promotes investments in the country by providing confidence to investors. but also a good regulatory framework provides guidance on to investors on actually what to do in terms of processes towards putting up investments. But also, it ensures that the investments are also being safeguarded. In Tanzania, our regulatory framework for renewable electricity is under the Electricity Act of 2008, with its amendments of 2020, but also it's under the what we call the rules for development of small power projects. As I said, we have the version of 2020, but also we have the net metering framework for. But this one is for grid connected electricity, which is not a part of today, I think. But so today we'll be dealing with a small with SPP rules of 2020, which provides guidance on investment on renewable off-grids. Um, our small power project framework uh, includes the rules, as I've just mentioned, but also we have the standardized power purchase agreement for uh, grid-connected electricity and also mini grids. But these mini grids, I'm talking about those TANESCO's mini grids, which I mean the small grids which are not connected to the main grid. And our SPP also covers the standardized tariff calculation methodology. And why did we have? Why did we started to have the SPP framework in Tanzania? We did that in order to promote investments in renewable energy projects because SPP framework in Tanzania considers renewable energy technologies, but also to reduce negotiation between the investors and the off-taker. Uh, but of course, the SPP framework was meant to fast-track investment in the renewable energy projects. Another objective was to safeguard the environment. Because as I said, our SPP framework considers technologies which are renewable energy. So SPP framework covers projects in the range of 100 kilowatts to 10 megawatts. Uh, of course, project generating from renewable energy technology, as I just mentioned. In terms of regulation of mini grids, um, as I said, regulation of mini grids also is governed by the SPP rules. And when I'm saying mini grids, I'm talking about the projects which generate power and supply through the mini or micro grids. And the scope is for mini grids, we start from projects starting with 15 kilowatts, which operates commercially, but also projects which are below that capacity, but which serves customers starting from 30 and above. So before the developer starts to develop the project of mini grids, the developer has to obtain a letter of support from the ministry, because the ministry is the overseer of the sector. So, and why did we introduce this support letter? Because sometimes back we had some conflict between developers trying to fight against, in one side. So we said that, okay, in order to avoid that, let the developer obtain a letter of support from the ministry, because the ministry cannot issue two support letters to different developers at one site. Um, but also the construction of distribution network and generation facility has to be in line with the Tanzania Bureau of Standards standards for mini grids. We have specific standards for mini grids in Tanzania. So after construction of the facility, a developer is required to apply for registration of the project at EURA. And we register project per segment. So if it's a mini grid that does generation and distribution, then the developers to obtain two registration. One is for generation, and the another one is for distribution. Um, so before commercial operations, a developer is required also to apply for tariff at the URA, and the application is done online through our licensing and order information system, which is so the developer can do this application wherever he is without coming to our office. Um, yeah, let me talk about what happens when the grid arrives at the area where there's a mini grid operator. So upon of the mini grid, a developer will apply for operators in these options. He or she may choose to become an SPP in the sense that uh, this developer will be selling power to the utility. But in this case, the, there will be a compensation of the distribution asset. Yeah. So this is one option. So the mini grid distribution assets can be taken over by the distribution network operator, and the compensated provided uh, this developer meets the criteria for compensation. But also the developer may choose to become an SPD in the sense that will be buying power in bulk from the distribution network operator and continue to serve the customers in that area. But also after choosing one to operate either as an SPP or an SPD, the developer has to apply to amend for the certificate because these projects which are less than 1 megawatt, they are only registered. They are not. They are exempted from licensing requirement. We only license projects which are above 1 megawatt. But also, the developer has to sign an SPPA. It's a standardized power purchase agreement and apply appropriate tariff that will be that will be obtained. But also, the developer has to meet the interconnection requirements in order to connect the mini grid to the main. Um, from the option number one, that is compensation. These are some of the these are the criteria that has to be met in order the project to be compensated. First, the mini grid has to be built according to the standards. That is the Tanzania Bureau of Standards. But also, as I said, we register these mini grids. So the mini grid has to be registered. Another criteria is that this mini grid has to be operating between 2 and 15 years. And lastly, uh, the developer, this mini grid uh, had to have the letter of support from the government. As I said, those are the requirements which are mentioned, I think, in the area slide. In terms of tariffs for SPP, SPD, and the VSPPs, and talking about mini grids here, uh, the tariff has to be cost recovery, but also if there is a subsidy, the subsidy is not considered in the tariff calculation. But also for these small power projects, uh, they have to be. The technology is obtained based on the technology specific criteria. So I'm talking about SPP. These are projects which are generating power and selling to TANESCO. Uh, so the tariff has to be, if it's a wind project, it has got its tariff. If it's a solar, biomass, yeah, they all have different consideration when it comes to tariffs. Um, with regard to the tariff for mini grids, so I say retail tariff calculated through the tariff model. We have the model which is we use for calculating tariff for mini grids. Actually, we got support from the IFS when we were preparing this model. Uh, And we have some assumptions which are in the tariff order of 2018. So we apply those assumptions in order to come up with the tariff law for mini grids. I can conclude by saying that we as regulators, we tend to balance the interests of parties. We understand that there are parties with different interests, and investors his or her own interests, but also the, the customers, they have got their interests. But so we as regulators will stand between, make sure that we balance interests of both parties. But also a good SPP regulatory framework promotes and safeguards private investment, as I said previously. Well-designed mini grids increase the rate of access and allows diversification of resources to various sectors. Well, we have seen one of the desalination uh, facility here. So with a good mini grid, I think that one can operate. So uh, applies also for irrigation and of course water supply subsectors. Utility can improve grid extension to consumers, but SPPs, which include mini grids, supplies electricity to the consumers who are farthest to the from the grids and off grids. And of course, for mini grids to be sustainable, uh, I think suitable subsidies should enable sustainability of these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Engineer Victor, for that excellent overview of the SPP framework as it applies to mini grids. And I'm sure in the discussion we'll touch on many of those specific points. Now I'm very pleased to turn to Mr. Mashaka Konta, who's the Senior Tax Officer from the Tanzania Revenue Authority, for his scene-setting presentation. Would be grateful if we can try and wrap it up in 7 to 8 minutes.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. As TRA, we are very humbled to be part of this forum, which brings together participants from the rural energy sector, including our taxpayers and the development partners, because we as TRA, we believe that through these seminars, we can make our taxpayers have ability to pay taxes without any problem, and especially through the reach of renewable energy in areas of the national grid. Uh, so we are very happy for this invitation. To the theme, we are required there to explain the current taxation and VAT rules regarding the renewable energy electrification for supply of products and services. First of all, the current taxation is divided into two. We have the direct taxation and the indirect taxation. And this taxation regime is in two phases. There are taxes that are applicable during investment stage and the taxation that are applicable during operations. So during investment stage, most of the taxes are those that are indirect. So those taxes are like import duty, which you pay during importation of those equipments, taxes like employment taxes. When you employ people in your project, you are required to pay tax based on the emoluments you are paying to those employees, and you have also to support the skills development, so you'll be required to pay skills development levy. Also, we have withholding taxes because we believe during the engineering and procurement and construction stage, you will be paying for consultant services and engineering services. So from those payments, you will be paying withholding tax for taxes on importation of services and professional services that you are paying to consultants in Tanzania. You will be required to withhold tax and then to pay on behalf. And also, for the issue of VAT is during importation, but most of these capital goods have arrangement for exemption according to East Africa Custom Management Act. So we have rules that are applicable to East Africa community. So the procedures available there for exemption. So it depends on what equipments qualify to be exempted and what are equipments that are applicable on that. So during, at least during investment stage, we'll be paying those taxes. And when you start production, you will be paying now indirect tax, that is corporation tax. But corporation tax depends on generation of chargeable income to tax. For the first 2 years, if you are making loss, those losses may be maybe in accounting you maybe have profit, but to the tax, because we are giving you allowance for capital you have invested, so for the first 2 years you will not pay tax, and you will start paying tax at corporate rate of 30% the time you relieve whatever losses you have incurred during operations. And then for the supply, if for the renewable energy, especially for those who are dealing with the solar products, we are exempting for the issue of VAT. The item like solar panels, vacuum tubes, solar generators, all those are exempted from tax. So you will not be required to be registered for VAT if you are dealing with the solar solutions. But if you are dealing with other products, apart from the one that are related to solar solutions, you will be required to be registered for VAT if you qualify the threshold that is available to the law, which is Tanzania shilling 100 million. So that is the issue of VAT. And then during operation also the employment taxes will be there, and also the withholding taxes depending on what services you are receiving from your professional consultants. So if you are receiving those professional services, you will also be required to pay withholding taxes. So that is at least a brief explanation of what taxes are applicable in Tanzania regarding the sector in general. But to be specific, we don't have a specific regime for rural energy products, but we have a general regime for all taxpayers, including those who are in these renewable resources products and services.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Shaka. And perhaps to stay on the topic, maybe I can turn to Ms. Rahelshu, who's also the Senior Tax Management Officer from the Tanzania Revenue Authority. And perhaps if you could shed some light specifically on some of the fiscal incentives or tax structures that may pertain to rural electrification or energy access in particular? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is an area of interest for most of us investors. The law, income tax and value-added tax VAT has provided some exemptions. Starting with on importation, during importation of capital goods, there is incentive, there is a deferment of tax. So when you import capital goods to Tanzania, there is deferment of VAT up to 10 years. So you'll be paying tax in a relief up to 10 years. And on income tax, there is exemption for strategic projects and projects with a public interest. So the exemption on income tax or tax at a reduced rate may be available upon Minister of Finance approval, and it must be gazetted. And there is other procedure as well. You have to follow the procedure at the Tanzania Investment Center to register and to initiate the process. So for those strategic projects and projects with the public interest, you might get the incentive of not paying income tax. Yeah, and there is another incentive on VAT is provided under VAT through Finance Act 2021 for those projects of strategic projects during importation of goods and services by an entity which has an agreement with the government of Tanzania. So there is exemption of VAT for operating and executing strategic projects. So those are the incentives so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think with the presentation of Ivura as well as from TRA, I think what's clear is almost the current landscape of both the regulations, but also the fiscal incentives and the tax regime that currently exists. So maybe I'll now turn to the private sector representatives from the panel, beginning with Aida Kiangi, who's the country coordinator for JUMEME Rural Power. Aida, it would be great to, we've heard about the regulatory regime, we've heard about the tax regime, and you've obviously been operating in the country for a long period of time in the mini grid space. It would be great to hear from you your experience with the policy and regulatory regime, where you see the current opportunities, but also perhaps areas of improvement as we look to scale up investments in the energy access in Tanzania.
Thank you. Just give you a quick intro to JUMEME. We're based out in the Lake Zone. We have 23 power stations and just about 10,000 customers. I'd like to safely say we might be the largest in the country, but I'm sure there are other companies that will beat us to it. For JUMEME, this sector has been very exciting for a long time. I think it's one of the reasons why we ventured away from what we normally do, which is the on-grid connected projects. But also, we were aware of the challenges. And so in the market of Tanzania, particularly because there were grants available through the EU and the ones were managed by RER, the Rural Electrification Agency, that gave us an incentive to also come to the party, so to speak, and bring in our own money as well. The biggest challenge, obviously, was sourcing equipment, but I think we've got good supplies of cable and poles. That has really been good. In terms of professional services, while we're building, we had a lot of, we were able to tap into a lot of skills in Tanzania. So I think that's important, having the skills base. Just based on that, I think the challenge we've started seeing as we're expanding is skilled technicians on the ground. And it's something I know Tere is working closely on, and Veta as well. So we have more and more, particularly around the mini grids. I think with the standalone systems, etc., we've got quite a bit of skill in the country. The policy environment, I think, for us, the challenge has been around the tariffs. the bureaucracy, which is not a fault of the government institution, but just sometimes things grind slowly. And I think maybe in the last 5 years, but that has changed, was I think arbitrary decisions that left us exposed as the mini grid. So if you'd asked me this question 2 years ago, I think we'd have had a different story. But right now, we're very positive that we're moving back in the right direction. We're hoping that tariffs will be gazetted, which is what will help us in terms of continued investment and expansion. I know my colleague and Mr. Labaa avoided the net metering, but we really want that to come to play, particularly where we might want to partner with different companies who have different technologies. What are the rules of the game there? The other one, as we're scaling up, is where TANESCO will be. We've been concerned that some of the decisions have not followed the plan they've had, and have caught some of us basically in the line of sight of the TANESCO grid. Whereas we do welcome the expansion for TANESCO, but when we're investing, we're looking at 15 to 20 years. Would like to get to that end point. The standards, I think within the society, we're really pushing, the association's pushing to make sure we're standardized. And so even the uptake with TANESCO, when they eventually do come through, we don't have any hiccups, but also amongst ourselves, that we're providing similar standards for our customers. And I think that's very important. And but last but not least, so I can hand over to the rest, is I think a common understanding of the technologies we're using is important for the regulatory authorities as well in government. But also particularly the data that we're collecting. If you're talking about bankable data, whether wind or solar, and even if government does come into play, it's important that we are talking about technology or platforms that we all agree can be banked. And I'll just give an example with wind, particularly for grid. There's some companies who have access to really good data. And even as TANESCO would like to sell in government, we have bought it, but realized the data is lacking. So I think there is an opportunity for the associations and with government to work with the private sector, and maybe some of these maps can be done without tapping into people's proprietary or intellectual property. And that will help government even in making decisions around the Power Master Plan. What do we actually have? And what's our competitive edge even within the East African power pool and the SADC power pool as well? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that intervention, and it covered a lot of ground in the limited time that you took. Took away a lot of important points around the need to fill skills gaps, around tariffs, but obviously we are seeing positive signals, as we heard also this morning, around net metering, around the risk of grid arrival, standards, common understanding of technology, especially as new applications emerge for renewables, but also around data and cooperation. So that's great. That's a great start. Maybe I'll now turn to Lucie Revert, who's the head of legal and ethics at ENGIE Energy Access. Of course, ENGIE covers everything from small systems all the way to mini grids. So obviously, your policy and regulatory exposure varies depending on the solution. But we'd love to hear your perspective, also as an international player, on how you're seeing the regime and what challenges and opportunities exist in Tanzania at the moment. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so maybe I will just begin with a brief introduction of what type of services we are providing. Basically, ENGIE Energy Access is a combination of three companies, initially Phoenix, Movisol, and Power Corner. With Phoenix and Movisol, they are more focused on solar home system solution, and with Power Corner, they are focused on mini-grid solutions. So for us, it's very important to be able to use the combination of all the solutions, because it's allowing us to be able to provide a solution that is tailored to the customer needs. And this can be a bit challenging because it means the combination can be different each time. It can be a combination at the same time. You come to a village and then you decide to install a mini grid, and you had solar home systems to connect customers that are not in the center of the village, for instance. It can be a bit different. Then you begin with the solar home systems and you come up later on with a mini grid. So it's also very useful to educate the customers on the use of energy with those different solutions. Maybe something that is challenging for us is also the regulation is not the same for the two type of solutions. So we need to find like a balance on what we can do and what is the best for the customers, but also what is going to be the most adaptable way to electrify the village. And what I would say, like, the challenges are not the same for the SHS and for the mini grids. For the mini grids, as it has already been said, the regulation is quite detailed on the licensing process, on the tariff. We are seeing also very good signals on that. So we are hopefully seeing moving forward in the good direction. And I think on the solar home system, it's a bit difficult because it's still an off-grid system, and you need to define what is exactly applicable. Is it applicable to your system? Is it something that you need to take into account when you want to launch your project with the solar home system? Or is it not applicable because there is maybe not enough details? So I know this is a bit contradictory what I'm saying, because in a way, we just need to find the right balance at what type of regulation are applicable to this specific solution, and we need enough details to be able, as developer, to understand what is expected from us, and also to be able to remain compliant, and to also be able just to discuss with the authorities to find the right solution and to remain within the lines of the regulation.
Thanks so much for that intervention. I think what we are hearing a lot is about the need to strike balance. I think the presentation of Ivura also talked about the balance between that you have to strike between consumers as well as the developers, and there are balances to be struck also by the developers themselves. So perhaps we'll come back to the point on this dynamic interaction between standalone systems and mini grids and how that can play out and how regulations can support that. But very briefly now turning to Hamisi Mikate, who's the managing director of ENSOL Tanzania. During our briefing yesterday, we understood that he wears many hats. So from EPC to project developer, mini grid operator, and whatnot. But would love to hear from you as well in terms of how you perceive the policy and regulatory landscape right now, from depending on the hats that you decide to wear today.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you have heard, my name is Hamisi Mikate, and Mikate is breads. So try to get breads during the afternoon. I'm very honored to be here with the distinguished panelists, and our session is well balanced in terms of gender, and I'm surrounded by two heavyweights, TRA and EURA. These are my bosses, so I need to be very careful with what I say. ENSOL is a local solar energy company. We have been in business for about 20 years now. Since then, we have been doing EPC business, and that is contractors. We are yet to do megawatt scale projects. So most of the projects we do are in kilowatt scale, and we do to residential, commercial, and the government projects. In terms of regulation and policies, as I've said, we are in 20 years game. So the policies, regulations which have been presented here, we are part and parcel in making them, and I can say we appreciate with what we have achieved as a country in terms of regulation and the policies. There are challenges. My colleagues have said it. there are challenges in. Actually, we have good policies and we have very good regulations. The challenging part is on implementation. For example, my colleagues here have mentioned about tariff. Yeah. The instruction which we got about tariff structure in the past 2-3 years ago was not from EURA. We feel that it was politically motivated. So what I see is what can we do to make EURA as independent as possible, so that there should be no political intervention. They should just follow the rules and legal structures which have put it in place. So that's the biggest challenge. And we are happy with what is going on now. And this happened after having a new minister and a new big bosses in those institutions. But what will happen if that changes also? So we need to see how we can protect organizations like EURA to be as independent as possible. And actually, this affects the investment. Any investor, for example, in renewable energy, the investment we are making are long-term investments. It takes years to get a return. So you need a stable and predictable policies and regulations. So if there is any interference in between, you discourage investors. In case of ourselves, we were to develop more than 13 mini grids from 2018 to now, but we stopped after this tariff issue. And actually, even the mini grid which we were operating, we started the power rationing because the money which we were collecting was not even enough to do some administrative issues at the site. On taxi regime, we thank our government. Since 2005, we had exemption in solar equipment. The only challenge we've been facing, not me only, but most of the players, is on clarity of the products, especially in the eyes of TRA. You know, for example, batteries, so many technologies of batteries, different structures of batteries. So sometimes it brings a challenge to TRA to know which is a solar battery and which is not. So I understand them, but it's very disturbing for most of project developers and even contractors, because it takes a long time to resolve those issues, which affects the implementation of projects. So in a nutshell, that's what I can say.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting a number of key points around tariff, but also maintaining this long-term predictable framework given the amortization periods of some of these investments, but also on a common understanding of taxes and clarity on products and all of those. One question I think that does come to mind, and I'll maybe turn to Aida, but also others on the panel, is about how we look at the procurement or the growth of the mini grid sector at the moment. Do we see it to be a process which is bottom up, where developers go out, identify sites, and engage with the regulatory process? Do we see, for instance, it being a public procurement program which also offers the viability gap funding that is required to address some of the economic viability challenges that mini grids face? From a private sector perspective, what's the sort of thinking around what might be preferred, whether it has to be a mix of both, but what's the thinking from the private sector side?
And that's a very good question because I think the jury is still out on that because different organizations or companies prefer different things. So I'll speak from a personal perspective. I think it's a bit of both because government as government does not know where all the sites are. And some players, when they do come in, not knowing the market, can also be misled. So some people have gotten their fingers burnt in some very serious players and have not come back in. But also when I was talking about data, where is it sitting? I think it's important that we do that and just remove that barrier to entry. Anyone who's serious in this market and wants to invest, understands the challenges, will not hold back just because of data. So if we remove that, it then allows for people to concentrate on what is important, which is all your licensing requirements, because that's a long process. Being able to ensure they can access, so buy it if it's been already, and that becomes a source of revenue and also a place where government will know who's coming into the market. Because not everyone who comes in is actually also a good player. You could have people speculating on land. The issue around land. If you've got sites that are in communal lands, how can we work with the communities and have free carry? If it's government land, whether it's village, how do then we do it that we don't have to outright purchase land? Those are the other conversations that we should be having once you're talking about data. So I think having, in short, having the mix is good for all players, but still having a tendering process because you still want to have the best solution and the best tariff and the most capable in that area. Different areas obviously have different challenges. I mean, I've got islands in the middle of Lake Victoria. It'll always be an expensive venture. So how do we then increase maybe subsidies on some of those areas to support communities and vice versa? So it allows government also long-term planning and other players and where you can get the grant financing to de-risk and to ensure that we don't get tariffs spiraling too far out for consumers.
Thanks, Ida, for laying that out. And maybe, Lucie, I can turn to you briefly and touch on the point that you mentioned about this interplay between solar home systems, mini grids, and the grid. Sometimes it may be that a place is suitable for solar home systems, which as demand evolves, you reach mini grids. And eventually, it really becomes a question of what kind of services you're providing. And could it be a situation where you have, let's say, a tendering process where you say this is the service you have to provide, whether it's tier 4, tier 5 access, but it's really up to you as a concessionaire, so to say, to identify the solutions that may be best suited for to deliver those services.
Yeah, I think that that system can work and be very efficient because um, we cannot really be close to any solution. If there is a tender, for instance, that say, okay, you need to electrify that village or those villages with that type of solution, for us, it's not going to work because we are able to cover the full spectrum of solutions, and it's best for us to be able to take a bit of both. Like what I'm thinking is SHS and mini grids, even if it can be a bit like not the common idea about it. SHS and mini grids are not competitors. For us, it's really complementary solution, and I think there is a market for all solutions because the customers does not have the same needs, and so it's very useful to be able to determine what is the right solution at the right place and at the right moment, because the solution and the decision is not going to be the same depending on the timing, but also on the regulation, on the country, on the villages, and on the customer needs. And it's going to evolve also along the time. I think it's a bit the same, like also for the grid, because for me it's the same. Off-grid and grid solution are not necessarily contradictory. They can work together, and that's very important because when we are especially for those type of projects in a village, in a country for like more than 20 years, we need to be able to anticipate. And it's also a way to stabilize the project to be able to say, okay, at a certain period in time, it could be SHS that is the best solution to provide. But at another period, it could be the grid, it could be a mix between mini grid and grid, or it could be a mix between SHS and mini grid.
Thanks so much. Maybe I'll turn to Engineer Labaa and we'll very quickly move to audience Q&A, so please be ready. Um, we, of course, regulation, policy precedes regulation. And from a regulator's perspective, How do you see, as the sector is evolving very quickly, what do you see as opportunities for improvements in the policy landscape, for instance? But also, as a regulator, how do you account for this? What the private sector asking for is, it's not just a binary way of there's a mini grid and the main grid comes, then we have these arrangements. But as a regulator, how do you manage this dynamic interaction between, stand solar home systems, mini grids, grid, and what are the tools that may be required to facilitate that from a regulator's perspective, but also from a policy perspective?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for your good question. I'll start with the second one. As I said, we as regulators, we regulate services and not products. And in my presentation, I said that we are regulating mini grids starting from 15 kilowatts and above. But a mini grid can also have a smaller capacity than 15 megawatt. I mean 15 kilowatt. But as long as it is serving more than 30 customers, that's where we start regulating. So solar home systems, I think basically they are products, and I think they need to be regulated by the Tanzania Bureau of Standards, not us. As I said, we are regulating services. In terms of the dynamics in the involvement of the sector, probably I would advise our ministry to start thinking of reviewing the current national energy policy. It has been there for 7 years now. I think the version we have is the national energy policy of 2015. 7 years, I think, it's quite a long period for for the police to stay. I think we need to review it and try to address some of the issues that have emerged. Because look at the mini grids. Most of the mini grids, I think, have started to emerge between 2016, 17, and that's where we, as regulators, started to regulate mini grids. Because from 2017, the government started to, of course, the government, with the support from the development partners, started to issue some grants on development of these mini grids. So that's where even as regulators, we started with technical regulation. So I said we have the standards for mini grids. So we got support from the IFS, and we established the standards for mini grids. So we thought it's important these mini grids, when they are built, they have to be built according to the standards. Yeah. Maybe I will ask if there is any support from development partners, if they can consider supporting us in terms of establishing the information systems that will enable us to capture data uh, from the from our regulatory, from our regulated entities, because every year we prepare the electricity subsector performance report, try to analyze the sector, and our sector includes also mini grids. So when it comes to obtaining data so that we can analyze to see performance of the sector, we get some challenges in terms of obtaining the reliable data. So if we can get assistance in ensuring that we establish the information system that will enable us to capture the information and data from our regulated entities, then I think that will be very helpful to ensure that we get reliable data and information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those very concrete suggestions. Before I open the floor, perhaps just briefly to go back to Mr. Hamisi Mikate about productive uses. And over the last 2 days and also this morning, we kept hearing about productive uses, agriculture, water. We know the opportunities exist. But could you reflect from a policy perspective, what do you think needs to be done to be able to facilitate more linkages between energy and agriculture, energy and water and others?
Okay. First of all, productive use is a very key to both utility scale business, which is managed and operated by the government through TANESCO. As you can see now, they have extended the grid to very remote areas where the use of electricity is very minimal, just lights and maybe television. So I think even the investment, sometimes you might think it's somehow to make it meaningful, we have to create a demand. Yeah. So even TANESCO, they have to create a demand for their customers, especially the rural ones. And we who are operating off-grid solutions, it's the same case. We have mini grids, and in order to be at least it have some returns, you have to promote productive use of electricity. So you have to create a demand, and for that case, those areas off grid and the rural communities where grid has been extended, they've limited purchasing power to procure productive use appliances, the cold rooms, the milling machines, and so forth, the pumping systems. So there is a need to have a policy structure or regulation or tax arrangement. Maybe we need to exempt some of the productive use appliances, which are very important. At the end, the aim is to improve the lives of the people, and we cannot improve the lives of the people just for lights. Yeah. So in order to see the improvement, we need to promote the use of energy in those communities. So I think tax is one area where we can look and see how we can make affordability to the rural communities.
Great, thanks. So I think lots of important points there, also around incentives for productive appliances. So requests from TRA will continue to grow. Maybe we'll open it up for questions. I see one hand here. This microphone's coming this way. Okay, maybe we start from there since the microphone is closest there. Yes.
Thank,
Please state your name, affiliation, and
Thank-
who on the panel is addressed to.
thank you. Thank you. My name is Livinus Manyanga. I'm coming from Arusha. I'm representing an NGO based in Arusha called Kakute. And my question here is that looking at the position that I have here and looking at the panel in front of us, my issues here is that looking at renewable energy sector and decentralized energy, we are looking at the supply and the demand, the end user. Now I can see clearly that from the supplier, there are a lot of representatives because we are well structured and organized. But I'm not sure if end users are well represented here, who are our customer. I'm just trying to ask amongst of the regulators in front of us, how is the end user is being represented? Because they are always looking at the quality, reliability, and affordability. How can these issues have been addressed before we we send the supply of product to the end user. The issue of the quality is also the issue that I would like to know, how the regulatory are well impacted or being capacitated in terms of technology itself. The reason why I'm asking is that when you are importing the product, looking at the development in the world, new products are coming very quickly. But when it comes to the HS code, as you are importing, there are new products that have come into the market. But when you are importing, sometimes you might find that the regulatory are not technically impacted enough to understand where that technology should fall in order to tax it properly. Now, if the regulatories are not technically impacted enough, how can we help to make sure that there are technical people within those departments in order that they can understand the supplier when they go to them when they're asking for tax relief?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, and perhaps I'll guide that to representatives from TRA. But maybe we'll take a bunch of questions, and then the gentleman in the suit there, and then we'll come to you, sir, just following the order of.
Hello.
Okay.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah, as I introduced myself earlier, I'm working with United Nations Capital Development Fund, in short UNCDF. We have a number of programs. One of them is to support local economic development, specifically on the mini-grid, off-grid and on-grid. And for the last 8 years, we have been working with REA, Tanzania Investment Bank, and developers. And this question goes directly to EURA. I really appreciate the government efforts in supporting this mini-grid. And I understand the government and development partners have put a lot of money in REA to support this initial cost feasibility development, development business plan and other. But again, they have the credit line with Tanzania Investment Bank to ensure that these developers are managing financial close so as to achieve the ministerial level priority and government priority in ensuring that there is electricity all over the country. Now, my question goes to you, and I'm asking whether do you really work closely with TANESCO? EURA, do you see one another on the eyes because you are in the same ministry? I'm asking this because we are supporting small developers by giving them grant. And this grant comes from government borrowing from the World Bank and development partners. That's what part of the equation. These developers are developing small hydro in the rural areas, hard to reach rural areas. You put the credit line at Tanzania Investment Bank. They are being assessed on the profitability and viability criteria. But these people have to go to the commercial banks to seek additional financing, so to complement the equation. But you go down to TANESCO, they are providing them 7 cents per kilowatt hour. We have spent a number of hours discussing with government TANESCO officials whether they have the financial model where they can put 7 cents to give us the number that can ensure the project is viable and profitable within 5 to 10 years. It's very difficult. Now, I can see, and I'm advising, if possible, to go into realistic situation. Because before any investor comes in, it involves a lot of things: feasibility study, detailed engineering study, permit, in the hiring of engineering, procurement, and construction. And that involves a lot of money. But even before embarking into those activities, which takes between 18 months to 24 months, before initial construction, one has to get the viability equation right. And if you put 7 cents into that equation, it's very difficult for that project to break even and to pay off the debt. And we
Thank you.
know,
Sorry.
yes.
Thank you for.
So I suggest
Yeah.
let's see how you can work together to see whether these initial efforts by the government and other agencies like REA and EURA are being complemented by the tariff rate you are providing. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have two more questions here, please, and
Yeah.
please keep it short and crisp.
Mine is short, maybe in addition to what my colleague said. My name is Mkumbo from SIDA, a Swedish embassy. I'm also working very closely with the developers there. And my little question goes to TRA, maybe the same issue. I don't know if the URA and TRA together, because we are providing grants to these mini grids. And these grants also they've been taxed VAT from TRA. So this is a grant to these developers so that they can give this service to the poor people in the villages. At the same time, TRA comes and they take VAT from this money. So I don't know if we don't have the answer today, but this food for thought. If you get it right today, I don't know. The second question goes to the Buddha when they speak about energy information management system. I think you see that together with EU, we are connected to help the Ministry of Energy to put up energy information management system. Unfortunately, Mr. Banker is not here. Maybe you can discuss with him. We've already discussed with the department how to design it. Said that now they are working with e-government so that to come up with something which will be talking together with this system should be speak with the Tanzania standard, Tanzania statistics. What we call it? Tanzania
Statistics Bureau.
TBRS, also this e-governance, etc., etc. So something's going on. It's a matter of discussion between you and.
Thank you.
And the third question goes to tariff. I'm very happy to hear that there's something going on tariff issues. Yeah, this was a killing factor which made us see that to stop using our fund. We have a lot of money we dispersed to REA, about $12 million, but we've stopped using it until we see this be solved. So hearing this information today is, I think, it's a good information for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll take one question with the gentleman, and then we'll go back to the panel for quick responses, and then we'll do a second round. I've been told we have to wrap up in 5 minutes, so we'll make it quick fire. Can somebody get a microphone to the gentleman up in front, please? Okay, there's... Sir, if you don't mind, can you go first? Because he's... No, because just for the rest of the group.
Thank you. I have two questions, very short. First question goes to EWURA, Engineer Labaa. You have mentioned about a letter of recommendation from the Minister of Energy. How long is this letter valid? Because there is a company holding a land now 10 years, denying these people to get energy service. The company has no capacity to develop a mini grid. Comes a company that can do, but they cannot access to develop a project for these people. Now, these people, 10 years, they are waiting for electricity. How long is that letter valid? And then question to TRA. One of the speakers says, pointed out the issue of limited knowledge on renewable energy products. TRA had already trained TRA workers 10 years ago. Now, if TRA plans to conduct a training to TRA staff on recognizing renewable energy products, will you accept that? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll turn now to the panel for quick responses. Engineer Labaa, if you would like to get us started, and then we move to TRA. Although I seem to see that the problems are already being addressed by solutions. So we probably won't have much to talk about, but go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, moderator, for giving me this opportunity to respond to some of the questions. I think most of the questions have been addressed to me. I'll start with the question from Engineer Matimbwe. Yes, there is a requirement that a developer has to obtain a letter of support from the ministry. And it is very well written in the rules that this letter of support expires after a period of 12 months. Yeah. So after 1 year, I mean, the letter is valid only for 1 year. If you can read in the rules, you will see it. Yeah. Another question, I think it came from Makifamba. Yes, he explained about the energy information management system that is being prepared at the level of the ministry, with support from the CEDA. Yes, I'm aware of this initiative, but I'm not sure if the information that is needed at the ministry is the same as the information that we need as regulators. So, yeah, maybe we can talk later. But of course, the information that we need, I think it's quite different from what the information is needed by the ministry. So we do analysis, as I said, because we have to, every year we see the performance of the sector. So we have to calculate like the reliability indices in terms of outages to see how the customers are getting electricity services, of course, and others and others. So I think we will talk later about it, Mr. McFarland. You also talked about the issue of tariff. Can I explain a bit about tariff? Because I've had some concerns from developers here that there's interference by the government. We started regulating the economic regulation we introduced in our rules just in 2019. And we've never approved any tariff of mini grids before, because previously we were doing light-handed regulation for mini grids. So we were not regulating mini grids in terms of technical and economic aspects. So we have never approved any tariff. So it's only the tariffs which, of course, I've got the good news today that the minister has given an objection for us to proceed with the tariff process. So after obtaining this no objection from the minister that we should proceed with the tariff process, we will take our recommendation to the Attorney General's chamber, where there is a chief parliamentary draftsman who will gazette the tariffs. And once these tariffs are gazetted, they become legally binding. So this will be the first mini grid tariff to be approved by the regulator. Yeah, so I think this point has to be very clear. So this will be our first tariff that we have issued for mini grids. We have never issued tariff for mini grids before. Yeah, so I thought that should be very, very clear to everybody here. Another thing that was asked, I think Mr. Manyanga wanted to know about the quality of products. As I said previously, that we as EURA, we only regulate services. We don't regulate quality of products. I think that is it's a mandate of Tanzania Bureau of Standards. We regulate services like the power quality, not the product of the appliances. Yeah. So.
Right.
Yeah. Another thing I think was from Mr. Muro, who appreciates the efforts by the government. Yeah, so we thank you for your, your yeah, thank you very much. Um, but you talked also about the credit line facility. Yes, we understand it very well, and we are actually we are a member of the technical committee. Also, we are a member of the steering committee of the trip. So we participate very well in that project in terms of advising accordingly. Yeah, so we understand it very well. You asked also if we work close with TANESCO. Yes, TANESCO, we work very close with TANESCO because we actually do compliance monitoring to TANESCO in every region, every year. We do this to TANESCO, and when we are preparing our regulatory frameworks, we involve them very, very well. Uh, with the move of tariff, TANESCO's tariff, the move was to come from the licensee, not us. When they think that the tariff is too low or is too high for them, it is the licensee who is required to apply for the tariff. Of course, TANESCO has to consult the ministry before applying for tariff. That is the procedure. Yeah, so it's not. I mean, we're waiting for application for tariff from licensees, and that is according to the procedures, and I think it is like
Right.
that. Yeah, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for addressing many of those points in detail. Perhaps we could last go to representatives from TRA, if you'd like to respond to any of the points. And then we'll close the session because I'm told that the food is running out, and so we must wrap up quickly.
Okay, thank you. We have noted 3 questions here. The issue of current tax on importation and the flexibility in the solar solutions products. So the participant is of the view that the TRA has maintained the HS code, but according to technological changes, there are some changes which fit in the existing HS code, but unfortunately, we as TRA, we are going to the general rule, which is of the view that the products are not properly taxed. So as TRA, we are encouraging participants between our taxpayers and the authority. We really need engagement with our taxpayers. So in case if you have something that you think is not proper, we encourage you to submit your views, and then through your associations, it's better that you may table your concern, and then TRA, as the advisor of the government in the issues of tax policy, may take it up to the government to see how it can fit in. Or yourself, you can advise maybe through the forums for budget changes, and then it can be taken up there. But we really encourage participation with our taxpayers, because we believe that if we are in the same direction, the tax correction will be easy, because everybody will comply, will have a voluntary tax compliance, will not use power to correct tax. So I think from here we'll take that, and then we will have a contact from here and then table to the management to see maybe the specific details of some issues that you think is not proper. And the issue of grants, taxation of grants to the VAT. We have not catched up the details of the matter, but in a nutshell, normally we correct VAT on the price of certain object. So there must be a subject matter. So it depends on your case. What was the subject matter? Whose price or that grant. So also I encourage you to maybe to table the facts and then to submit to the management and then see maybe if there is the issue of police according to the impact of your projects to the community. If maybe the TRI were right on establishing the subject matter, we may advise the government to have a reform of that specific issue. Maybe from there you can contact and then to see the details of the issue, to see whether it was a case to case or it were a general, maybe it was a general issue, maybe regarding the renewable sector as partners in the sector. So I think we may contact and then to see how we can see that. To the issue of whether we are ready to receive training, as we are not limiting knowledge impact. That's why from my first point, I said we will encourage engagement with the taxpayers. So in case you have anything, maybe because this is the issue of knowledge, though we are going to present it now to the management, but you can write us official letter and then we'll be back up to connect with the management. But what we believe, the doors of our commissioner are very open. In case of anything, will be listened and then issues will be sorted out.
Right.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for those responses. I think we have a clear way forward. We are out of time, absolutely. And I would just like to thank all the panelists and the presenters for their excellent contributions. So perhaps for the round of applause. And I'm sure that this conversation will keep going. It's a difficult topic to address in an hour and a half, but thank you also for staying during lunchtime. Thanks very much. And the panelists are, of course, available for future conversation. Thanks.